So, where are you today? I know we are physically in all different places, but I mean emotionally and spiritually. My place, I want to curl up in a little ball in my bed, pull the covers over, and just lie there. I don't want to adult anymore. I don't want to mom anymore. I don't want to think. I don't want to act or do. And that's how I'm feeling. And it's okay. When we own our feelings and feel them, we feel better. Less guilt and shame and less shooting on ourselves and just breathing. So, what are you feeling? What we're feeling gives us our lens to how we see the world. Our lectionary reading this weekend is John chapter 11, verses 1 to 45. And this I read through the lens of being emotionally exhausted and being nervous and scared of what's to come. So this is what John reads. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, in the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus is the one who's ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, Jesus said, this illness doesn't lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, Jesus stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to his disciples, let's go to Judea again. The disciples asked Jesus, Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you there, and you want to go back again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble, because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble, because the light is not in them. After saying this, he told them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. The disciples said to Jesus, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right. Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought that he was merely referring to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. For your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us go, so we can die with him. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she met him. She went out and met him, while Mary stayed home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would have not died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to Jesus, I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, the teacher's here, and he's calling for you. And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would have not died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He asked, "Where have you laid him?" They said to Jesus, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of a blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to Jesus, "Lord, already there's a stench, because he's been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When Jesus had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in Jesus. I read that through the lens of emotional exhaustion. If only you had acted, there wouldn't be death. There would have been a cure. If only someone hadn't delayed. If only there had been action and something done. I feel Martha deep. I learned about our politicians who were briefed on the coronavirus months ago and how they chose to sell their stock. But they didn't choose to do anything to prepare us. And I get angry. I learned how our politicians were warned many, many times over the years that we are not ready as a country to face a pandemic. And yet, there were cuts to health care. And there was no pressure to study disease and prepare us. I see now what we are reaping from greed, from serving ourselves instead of others, and from the refusal to hurry and act. We reap death. We're reaping death. I'm having this hard time in my head understanding the gigantic numbers that are being brought to me, visualizing just how many people are sick in my own state. Not to mention the USA and the world. I read about the hospitals in New York that are using trash bags as gowns, as hospital gowns. I read about the California hospitals that are considering enacting involuntary do not resuscitate orders. So against someone's will, they won't try to resuscitate. I read about the cities and towns in Italy with no room for their dead, where a single undertaker in one town is all that is left. And she works and works, putting body after body in coffins that then go into military trucks that pass a priest saying quick prayers and reading off the names of people before stacking them before crematoriums. But yet even there's a long delay. Maybe 4 days. 4 days of reeking. I read about Madrid, Spain, where the elderly have been left to die alone in their beds as people fled nursing homes. And I try to picture what is coming here. I try to picture that and hold faith at the same time in our state governor and our state health director, and yet the math keeps overwhelming me. If we don't stay home in the self-quarantine, if we don't slow the spread of this, if we don't delay, we are literally going to lose thousands of people just in this state. Delay going out, and delay spreading the virus, delay, and though there still will be death, there will be less. On one hand, I hold hope and faith. Hope because this week we learned we have delayed the peak. The peak is when the most amount of cases are coming in at the same day. And we have delayed that. It originally was going to be about next week. But now we know it's now pushed off till May. And the further and further that we isolate and keep ourselves from passing this virus, the further that peak comes. And that is more time for hospitals to be built, more nurses and doctors to be trained, more of the sick to be cured, to make room for more. I have this hope. We are doing it. And I have faith. Faith in the God-given science that's directing us. Faith in my community that we are staying together, connected by phone and internet, connected with letters, connected with prayers, even as we're physically apart. And I have faith that God will never forsake us. And yet, even as I have this faith, I also hold these feelings of sorrow and anger. I cried reading about the children who wave goodbye to their grandparents and parents through windows as ambulances take them off, and they know they'll never see them again. I cried over the fractured communities. So many of our communities are made and protected by the memories our elderly hold. They are our wellspring of memories and knowledge, and that's being wiped out. I had anger. I feel anger with the entire situation. Angry with all the people, myself included, who didn't know how serious this was until it's too late. Angry with the worship of mammon, the worship of money, the economy, over lives. Angry that we are losing first responders and doctors and nurses and undertakers and volunteers to being Good Samaritans. When I think of Mary and Martha, I picture them holding two fistfuls of conflicting emotions too. On one hand, they have so much faith that in the last days, people will rise again in the resurrection. And in that same hand, they have all this hope that Jesus is here, Jesus who does miracles. But in the other hand, the hand that held their dead brother, they hold anger. God, where were you? You're too late. Sorrow. Why are bad things happening? Why haven't you interceded? Jesus responds with as much muddled emotions in our reading. He has such confidence that God will hear his prayers and respond positively. But he weeps. We're told he's greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. Like the core of his being, his soul is affected. But yet, he delayed. There's so many emotions here. And watching, reading what's going on around the world brings as many emotions to me as the fairly idyllic, the fairly fantastic emotions I have from having my husband home and my daughter home, and we have 3 meals together every day now. There's no commute, there's no places to visit, but people are dying. It is such a strange mix of emotions. A feeling of calm and a feeling like this is the calm before the storm. I watch death creeping towards us. A friend's professor first, and then a coworker's father, and then an old professor of mine, and then my husband's coworker. Now my own brother is suspected of having COVID. While I pray and fret over him, I'm constantly checking myself and my husband and my daughter. Is this a fever that all toddlers get? Is it worse? Is it just my imagination? Fear and grief and anxiety and hope and faith and trust, everything thrown together in this mix. And our reading has the same sort of mixed emotions. Part of being human is being a paradox, of having opposites held together in the same thing. Much as Jesus is wholly human and wholly divine, we could be wholly angry and wholly happy at the same time. We are mixed. And that's good. That's us feeling with the world. It's chaotic, but it's us. And Jesus felt this. God feels it, and the Spirit within us takes all these emotions and prays them for us with every beat of our heart. God knows. When I think about our upcoming Easter, I feel mixed emotions again. Or maybe not even mixed so much as just polar emotions. And I get anxious, and I get sad. I wonder, is it still an Easter celebration, still joy, if we're all isolated? How are we going to do a sunrise service and breakfast? Do we do breakfast in individual beds? Can you still have communion if you don't commune together at the same time? And I've heard calls to open up the church for Easter, and I shiver. I can't, in good conscience, do this. Reverend William Brown said it best regarding this very case. He said, this year, let us make Easter profoundly memorable by celebrating the empty tomb, by letting our sacred gathering spaces remain empty as testimony that lives are being saved in doing so. The empty tomb, after all, marked the beginning of resurrection. Let's linger over it this year. Let's revel in it. Let's follow the science as we follow Christ from the cross to the empty tomb that is emptied of death. A sacred space emptied of death. A sacred space where Jesus calls us out by name and sends us out into the four winds of the world to empty us of death. Much like the Spirit drove Jesus into the desert to purify him and cleanse him and test him and prepare him for the mission of all the crowds, I feel like we are in this isolation and we are becoming healthy and clean and prepared for that time when we are called back together again. I feel like this is the Lent that will make us rejoice with a brand new joy at the miracle of death conquered and people brought back together again. So, what is our Easter plan? Our Easter plan is to stay in our homes, to rejoice that our sacred place is empty of death, to care for the least in the body of Christ, and to worry about their health and not spread them viruses. And rejoice. There is a power greater than death, and that is God. God is love, and love cannot be killed by death. So as you get ready for Easter, I ask you to gather a few things. I ask you for next week to gather some green construction paper or branches. I ask for the following week for Easter itself to take around you some of your food for the day, and we are going to commune together. At the times we come together, let there be a blessing upon it, but I ask you to pick specifically something that's going to be set aside, because by setting things aside, we make them sacred. I also ask that you take photos and videos and tag me in them on Facebook, email me them, mail me them. Photos of everything you are doing at home. The chaos of working from home, the loveliness of your children playing in the yard. Show me the homemade meals that are big and the homemade meals that are the last little bits put together. Show me what your Lent is. And on Easter, when we gather spiritually, I'm going to share with all of you the video of all of these images put together so that we can visually gather as we spiritually gather and physically stay apart. So whatever you're feeling, own it. It's okay. God feels it too. And may God bless the space between us until we meet again.